Okay, folks, hold back the tears. Try not to use too many Kleenexes. But this is bringing us to the last section that I have to present and lecture upon for week 8, meaning that the end is upon us in a few some short slides. So we're going to look at project management. Here's the learning outcomes that you can review for yourself. The first topic we're going to talk about is looking at reasons why projects fail. Each of these I have experienced firsthand, naturally, in a software industry, because there's no one project that's always successful. Every project is going to experience, to some degree, some of these reasons for failure. The first is unclear and missing business requirements. That was the most common. It was not unusual for a client to call in and with some idea of what they may want their universe to look like. And of course, the business analyst, being the business analyst, sees the dollar signs to generate, so they convince him that that's a great idea to do. And so within having those conversations, the business analyst would often, I wouldn't say often, we really did have a good staff, and I miss working with each of them, but they would still, they're human, they would still miss or misunderstand or misrepresent what the user's asking or wanting to accomplish. Now, another reason for project failure is skipping the SDLC phases. Obviously, without going back to that chart or the diagram of it, obviously if you skip a part in there, you're setting yourself up for failure. Each of the parts of the SDLC exist for a reason, and that's to increase the likelihood of success for any given project. Failure to manage the scope. The scope is the requirements. Scope creep occurs when the scope increases. That's when the user says, "Oh, that looks great. Now, would it be too much to add this little thing? Would it be too much to add just this little bit? Would it be?" And 6 months down the road, you're still adding little bits, and you have about rewritten the system at that point. Feature creep is similar to a scope creep, but it's when they're adding extra features. And to me, there's not much difference between scope and feature, because adding to the scope is adding to the scope. But regardless, the text splits it out, so we must talk about it in two separate options. Failure to manage the project plan. This would simply be when the business analyst or when the project manager dumps the project off in the lap of the developer. They walk away and are not concerned about it until the day it's due. And when they come up to find out that it's not finished for whatever reasons, then they want to get all hot and bothered. Then last, changing technology. Technology is ever changing, and it can have a potential to impact what you're trying to create and develop on the system. Benefits to successfully managing a project. I think that these should really go without saying. I think they're pretty much common sense, but tangible benefits include decreased expenses. Obviously, you're not going to be paying someone 40 hours worth of labor cost on a 10-hour project if it's properly managed. Decreased processing errors, decreased response time, increased quantity or sales, increased quality. Intangible benefits: improved decision making, improves community service, improves goodwill, and improves morale. There's about 6 feasibilities. And for testing purposes, I am too good to the students by pointing these things out. For testing purposes, I would know what the feasibilities are and the points to the right of that. Economic feasibility measures the cost effectiveness of a project. Operational feasibility measures how well a solution meets the identified system requirements to solve a problem. Scheduled feasibility measures the project time frame to ensure it can be completed on time. In other words, do you have enough resources being allocated to be able to meet the deadline? Technical feasibility measures the practicality of a technical solution and availability of resources and expertise. Political feasibility measures how well the solution will be accepted in a given organization. And then last, legal measures how well a solution can be implemented within the existing legal and contractual obligations. On the next chart, I do apologize. I was reading my notes and not advancing the slides. Make sure you review that. You do have the presentation available to be able to view. Here, this demonstrates the cost impact that errors have on a project. Now notice how in the planning phase the cost of an error is very low. You go all the way to the right into the maintenance and the cost is very high. Well, this would be because of all of the time, the further it goes, you've invested all of these labor costs into the project. That's part of the biggest expenses that's accumulated here in the cost. So you're losing all of the time spent on the previous phases in order to make it happen before you discover that there's an error. Always keep an eye out and keep checks as early as possible in all of the phases for potential errors. The sooner you catch it and the sooner you fix it, the better off you will be. Interestingly, analysts predict that investments in MIS projects worldwide is over $1 trillion. That's $1 trillion that someone somewhere needs to manage. There's a lot of money that can be made if you have a knack for project management. Being detailed-oriented really helps. 70% of this will be lost due to failed projects. So if we pay attention to where errors are happening and catch them sooner, we can recoup some of this loss. Consequences of failed projects include damaged brand, that's your brand image, the reputation of your company, lost goodwill, the customers requesting the solution that you were supposed to be providing, they're going to lose faith that you're actually going to be able to do it. If you're in a partnership, you could dissolve the partnership. There could be a loss of investment opportunities and low morale. Using project management to deliver successful projects. This website here, pmi.org, I would encourage you to go and check them out. They offer 3 areas of focus. One area is on ethics, which is distinguishing characteristics of a practicing professional. Standards, which would be standards as relevant to any specific industry that you're working in. And then accreditation. If you'd like to become an accredited project manager, it gives you information on that. The triple constraint, Benjamin Franklin's timeless advice. By failing to prepare, you prepare to fail. Definitely applies to software development projects. The Hackett Group analyzed 2,000 companies and discovered 3 in 10 major IT projects fail. 21% of the companies state that they cannot adjust rapidly to market changes. 1 in 4 validates a business case for IT projects after completion. You should validate the business case for a project before you begin it. How else are you going to determine if the return on investment is going to be there for the effort it's going to take for the project? All of this is reactive. All of this is the result of reactive leadership. As you are progressing through your business studies and you're starting to position yourselves, hopefully for leadership roles, embrace being proactive, not reactive. All of these other things that we've talked about here is a result of being reactive. All right, variables and the triple constraint. The triple constraint is time, resources, and scope. Do you have enough time in order to meet the deadline? I'm sorry, but one person cannot meet a project deadline within 5 days if it's a 60-hour project. It does not happen. Don't promise the clients a deadline that is not going to be attained or can't be attained. Don't assume that your staff is going to be able to work overtime to meet your ridiculous promise to the client just because they're hot and bothered and want it now. Give them a pacifier, let them play with the pacifier a little bit, and buy some time for it to be done right. Resources. Are you going to have enough individuals working on it in order to meet the deadline? Do you have all the technology resources available and ready to begin? Or are you going to have to order something in order for the developers to begin their work? And then the scope, that's making sure that you have all the requirements laid out like you should and all the documentation there coming out of that design phase for the developers to begin work and to be successful in doing it. Some terms here. Project is a temporary activity undertaken to create a unique product or service. A project being temporary is not measured in terms of time, like months. It's measured by the simple fact that at some point that project will come to an end, whenever that may be. Project management is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities to meet project requirements. And then the project manager is the individual who is the expert in project planning and management and defines and develops the plan and tracks the plan to ensure that it's going to be on time and on budget. A few more terms. A project deliverable is any measurable, tangible, verifiable outcome. Those KPIs, those CSFs, again, come back into play from Chapter 2, from Week 2. Project milestone represents key dates when a certain group of activities must be performed. And then the PMO, Project Management Office. If you have more than one project manager in your organization, someone has to manage the project managers, and that would fall under the umbrella of the Project Management Office. Project stakeholders are individuals and organizations actively involved in the project or whose interest might be affected as a result of project execution or project completion. That would be any of the users, any of the customers, any of the clients, anyone using the system, whether they asked for the modification or not, that would be impacted by it. Executive sponsor is the person or group who provides the financial resources for the project. You may have a client that says, I'm willing to pay for this big modification to the system, knowing that these other people, your other clients, are going to benefit from it. I'll be willing to pay for it. And they are the executive sponsor. Now, as you start advancing through your careers, you're going to start running into this notion of SMART goals and SMART criteria. Probably when you have your annual performance reviews with your employer and your supervisors, they're going to ask you to craft SMART goals. So it's a good thing to go ahead and start practicing now so that you know a little bit about what they're talking about. Again, there's so much of this course that even though it's focused and centered on MIS, it's very applicable to your everyday lives and other functions within your careers. It's not just limited to the IT or the IS field. SMART stands for specific, measurable, agreed upon, and realistic, and time frame. So your goal must be specific, measurable. You have to be able to have KPIs, CSFs defined to say, okay, this is how I know that we're on target. Kind of goes back to that discussion we had when we were talking about that in week 2. Agreed upon, you, the stakeholders, the managers, whomever, they have to agree to your goals. You can't just say, okay, I've created it, here it is, let's go do it. You create it, you have conversations by all involved, and then it gets approved. Realistic. Realistic would not be to totally redesign your system and have everything as a web interface instead of a dummy terminal interface within 6 months. That's not realistic. And then time frame. A realistic time frame goes hand in hand. Don't promise the client that they can have this project by the end of the week, and it's Monday, and it's a 60-hour project, and you only have one person who only has 20 hours of time available that week to work on it. It's not realistic to expect that other coworker to work overtime and promising it to the client by Friday is not an accurate time frame either. The project plan is a formal, approved document that manages and controls project execution. It should be well-defined, easy to understand and read, because you may have varying levels of education sitting at your table. You may have a factory worker who has a high school diploma. You also may have an executive who has an MBA. You need to make sure that it's easy to understand by all parties. You don't dumb it down for the manager, but you don't overcomplicate it for the factory worker either. Communicated to all key participants. Everyone that's involved with the project needs to know the plan. Appropriate to the project size. You won't write a half-page project plan for a $200,000 6-month project that's going to redesign the shipping process. It needs to be an appropriate plan size to match the project. And prepared by the team rather than by the individual project manager. A true leader recognizes the value of the knowledge of everyone around them. You will be hired as a leader because you're able to recognize how to pull together the resources around you and inspire people to work together, not for solely what you know. The same goes here. A successful project manager is going to write this plan with his other team members because he or she recognizes the fact they know more about it than the project manager does. And so they want to tap into that knowledge to make it successful. In managing the project, they have two tools. There's a PERT chart, which shows dependency and critical path, and then there's a Gantt chart. This is the example of a PERT chart. Here, the red lines indicate the critical path to success and how one project needs to be able to flow to the next, and it gives the time frame. This was created through, it looks like it was created through Microsoft's project management software, if I had to take a guess. But that's a PERT chart. This is the same thing shown with a Gantt chart. Here you have your task, you have the start time, you have finish time, who the task will be assigned to. Here they use generic positions. You would actually specify a person to take ownership of that task. And here, this lays it out in graphical form where one begins and one ends. This is the planning phase. This is the analysis phase. These are the small steps to make it happen. One begins, one ends, and so on. Insourcing, outsourcing. Insourcing is when you use your resources from within your organization. Outsourcing is when you go outside of your organization. This is where you use your in-house developers and analysts. This is where you hire contractors to come in to handle the project. Outsourcing projects, factors driving growth include core competencies, financial savings, rapid growth, and the internet. Core competencies, I may not have the skill sets in-house to complete the project, so I may have to contract someone outside to do it. Financial savings, it may be cheaper for me to contract a web developer for 6 months than for me to permanently hire a web developer that I may only use 6 months out of the year. Rapid growth, I may not be able to purchase and hire the staff that I need quick enough in order to meet the demands of the market. And internet and globalization, again, the world is flat. Yes, I had to get that in one last time before this course is over. The flattened world allows me to be able to reach out to other countries and tap into resources there. And as you're going to see, here, it may become cheaper to do that. I may be able to hire better quality of workers to accomplish my task in China for a lot cheaper rate than I would in the United States. And we know the educational training and things in China is more competitive and a lot higher quality than the United States. And so you get more bang for your buck in this situation. So those are the reasons for outsourcing. The benefits: increased quality and efficiency, reduced operating expenses for headcount. That's primarily in all of the expenses bundled up in HR, the benefits and insurance and things like that. Access to outsourcing service providers' expertise. You can tap into their other people's resources and knowledge bases and skills. That increases the quality of your product. And then increased flexibility for faster response to market changes. Challenges: a length of contract. When you go to outsource and contract someone, they want to be hired for a little bit longer than 3 months. No one wants to keep having to look for a contract every 3 months. So you want to be able to offer, have a need there to help entice them to accept your contract. Threat of competitive advantages, and then loss of confidentiality. You risk losing confidentiality because when Bob the contractor leaves your organization, he's taken his knowledge of your system with him. Now granted, you've probably had Bob to sign a no-compete contract, but that's only valid for 6 months to a year, and after that, he can work for one of your competitors. Granted, your system will have changed since Bob would have been on it last, but still he contains some of your trade secrets to some degree. All right, that concludes this lecture series. I thank you for your patience in going through it. I hope it cured some of you from your insomnia. Actually, I hope it won't that bad. But at any rate, make sure that you've got all of your work complete so I can get grades finalized. Give everything your last best effort to secure that grade.